Hi guys, and welcome to today's video. In this video we're going to see how we can make just a simple ball bounce off of squares that we create, or in our case they will act like walls, as you can see how I named them. So that's what we're going to be doing, and let me run that just so you see what exactly I mean. And there's one feature that our ball will always start with a different velocity, basically the speed that it has. And yeah, so we'll look how we can accomplish that using the physics engine. And now let's delete everything just as we do usually. Delete that. Alright, now I created this prefab which I'm going to delete. The wall is going to be deleted. Now these materials will be deleted, everything. So I will start where you probably are. Now first thing, let's organize our folder structure just a little bit. So we don't even have a scripts, oops, not that one. So we don't even have a scripts folder, which I should have, not scripts, but scripts. There we are. Now let's add these folders into scripts. Alright, we need another one. We need another folder, come on, which will be basically called sprites, which will just hold all sprites that we have, like this for example. Move this there so it looks a bit more organized. Now let's go into our prefabs. So if you don't know guys what prefabs are, then I strongly encourage you to watch my last video, because there I cover what prefabs are. Anyway, now let's create a prefab again. Now let's go first and create, well, first actually I'm going to just, oops, not here, go to sprites. Oh, I just got my circle sprite here. I'm just gonna drop it here. And if you're not sure how you can create a circle sprite, then just go to create sprites and you'll see circle. That's really what it is. So we created that circle. Now let's go to our prefabs folder. Let's make that a whoops, come on, let's make that a prefab. There we go, we've got that as a prefab. Alright, now what do we want to do? Well, first we want to make that ball bounce. However, before jumping into there, let's just make our walls first. Alright, now let's go to, and by the way guys, I'm just using another scene that I made, which is level 2. If I go to sample scene, you'll see the last video scene that we did, basically where we covered prefabs. But then I just decided to start another scene, just so we start from scratch. And if we sometimes want to go back to this scene, we can just hop over it, and all of our stuff will be here. Just as a heads up. Anyway, let's go back to our level 2. Now let's create the walls. And alright, now let's move our square into our hierarchy there. Now let's make that as a prefab. And alright, now this will be the wall. Well, actually we don't want a top wall in our case, because our ball won't bounce until there, at least for this video. So let's just make it a normal side wall. That's what we need to do. Just like that. Then let's just, oops, that shouldn't be a square though. Just forgot to rename that, which will be wall. Now let's go to overrides, go to apply all. Now this should change the structure, just like this. So it's a side wall now. Now let's also rename it and call that a wall. And yeah, that will do for now. Then let's move that wall there. So let's make this actually a horizontal wall. Well, in that case that's not really a wall, but whatever. There we go. So we've got some boundaries for our ball to bounce off of. However, what we're missing is, well, first we want to make that ball bounce off these walls, but how exactly are we going to do that? Well, first off, we need to add colliders, right? So let's go and do this really quick. Now, since we're using prefabs, we made these walls prefab. Let's go and say box collider 2D, and let's apply that to every single prefab. There it goes. Now all of our prefabs, which are the walls, have this collider there. Now let's, well, I'm not going to remove that square because we use it in another scene. However, let's just a little bit organize our code. So I'm just going to say here, I'm just going to create a new object which will be just walls, and I'm just going to move these walls there, oops, not there, but within there we go. So it's just more organized. Okay, so we've got that, oops, not that one, there we go. So we've got our ball, we've added the colliders. However, our ball still needs a collider, so let's add a collider. And for circles, we just need a circle collider. Alright, however, there's still one key thing missing for our ball, and that is, since we want our ball to move, can you think of which component we should use in this case? We already covered that in a previous video, so pause the video now and try to guess which component we actually need to add to the circle. And if you said that we need to add rigid body, then you would have been correct, because rigid body basically allows us to be, so just give it velocity, which is speed, basically allows us to have mass, gravity, and all that good stuff. But I already covered rigid body in a previous video, so make sure you watch that. Alright, let's move our rigid body on top of, well, whatever, it doesn't matter really now. I'm just going to have it as it is. Alright, now that's pretty much it so far. Now if I run that, you see that the ball is going to just drop and nothing else is going to happen, because the ball has gravity, and this ground here is a collider, the ball has a collider, and that's why it's stopping there. However, we need some kind of a mechanism to tell it to just basically bounce, right? That's what we want. We want it to bounce. Now this is actually pretty simple, surprisingly. So if we add a new folder and call that materials, because the bounce effect is already created with by the physics engine. And if I go to our materials, and the materials, because the bounciness is actually called a material, and you'll see what I mean exactly. Go to create and go to physics material 2D, and that's it. Now let's call this bounciness effect, right? Now you see here in the bounciness effect material, we basically have friction and we have bounciness. Now don't worry about friction, we can just leave it as 0.4. However, for bounciness, when it's set to 0, basically means no bounce. Well, if we set it to 1, that means there is a bounce. However, there's still one thing missing, and that is the ball or the circle doesn't know of its existence. Basically, it doesn't know that this bounciness effect actually exists. So if I go to where is it? If I go to circle, which is our ball, and then I go to this material, see, that's why I called it material, because that's how it's called really. And then I click on here, and then I select the bounciness effect, and as you can see, this is the only option, because this is the only material we have gotten so far. So let's create, let's select that. So now let's move this a little bit so it's nicely symmetric. Now let's run that, see if it's actually going to bounce. There we go. So now it bounces, and since it is set to 1, if I go to materials, bounciness, and since it is set to 1, you see that every time it will get to the same height as it started. Yeah, okay. So we've got that. Now there's one thing though. Every time it will just fall and go back up in the same line. However, what we want to do is every time our ball or our circle prefab to have different velocities, so it will start in a different direction. Like sometimes it will start going to the left, sometimes it will start going to the right, and every time it will have different speed or velocity. Now how are we going to do that? Well, okay, now let's select your circle, okay, then go to add component, and let's add a new script. Now I already created the script, which I just called circle. So go on and just create whatever you want as a name for your for your class, but I just went with circle just so it's nice and simple. So circle, and I already have it as I said. Let it load. Well, it's actually not going to load, so let's open it. I have already created that, but of course we're going to start from the beginning. Alright, now make sure you delete your namespace that has system in it. You probably have something like that. Delete that, and the reason I want you to delete that is because we will be using the random.range, which I discussed in the previous video as to why it actually has a conflict between Unity Engine namespace and the system. So in our case we want to get the random from Unity Engine. Alright, now what do we want to do? Well, okay, let's go to our circle. Let's go to the components, and what we are interested in is the rigid body because whoops. So yeah, we basically want to get the rigid body. That's all we want to do. However, there's one more specific thing that we want to get from the rigid body, and that is the velocity, right? And yeah, again, basically the velocity is just the speed. Think of it as a speed. Now it's actually pretty simple to change it. What we need to do is first get the this component. And how are we getting it? Oops, not that one. How are we getting this? We're basically saying get component. Now I will also introduce you to a keyword which is actually very important, but I haven't already discussed in the previous videos, so I will actually make a dedicated video towards it. For now I'm just going to give a brief overview about it, and this keyword is called this. So this get component, and this basically refers to the object that has this class. For example, now in our case circle has this circle or this class appended to itself. So when we say this, we mean to the circle object that has this class. But there's a bit more to it, and I will actually make a video dedicated to this keyword. For now, we can just say this dot. So when we say this dot get component, we mean get the component of this, and by this again we mean the bow, and get the component. Which component do we want? Well, we're interested in the rigid body component, so let's say rigid body 2D. That's the component that we want. And then we basically say this we put these parentheses as this is a method, right? This is giving us the component. And then we want to access the velocity, and the way we access the velocity is just say dot velocity, just like that. And then we want to set it to something, and this something is actually vector2. And now we could say vector2, and the vector2, if I come here how did it give us the, well, anyway, so basically what vector2 wants as arguments, right, whatever we put between these parentheses, is float x and float y. There we go. It says float x, float y, and this float x and float y is basically the coordinates, the x coordinate and the y coordinate. Now for x, we want to give it a random. Well, first let me start with a simple example. 1f and then 2f, and we say f because that's a float. So that would work. So it will set the velocity of the bow to 1f to the x and 2f to the y. However, there's one thing that we want to, and which is add a little bit more flexibility to it. And how are we adding more flexibility to it? You guessed it, by creating a random value every single time we start a game. And why is it every single time that we start the game? Well, that is because we put this line of code in our start method. So that means every single time our circle, which is this object, will have different velocity. All right, and all right, now let's write the random x, which would be random.range. And again, I have covered random.range in a previous video, so make sure you watch that video if you don't understand now what this is basically. But what we're in a nutshell saying is generate a random number from 2. So the first number that we're going to put here is going to represent the minimum number, and let's say we want to start from 1.4 up to 5f. Alright, and then we want to do the same thing for our y component, which is random.range, then 1.4f, and then 5f. So this will give us a random number between 1.4 and 5, and we're missing the parenthesis here. And then here again, we're just saying, basically we're saying the same thing. Every single time it will just give us a random number. Alright, now let's see if I save that, go back here and run it. Let's see if it's actually going to do what we want it to do. Let's compile first. There we go. You see how it went a bit to the right? Well, that's because we added the velocity. And there we go. Every time it will have a different velocity. Now let's rerun that and see whether it's going to go back to the same. Yeah, it did go to the exact same position. Let's try it one more time. Okay, so it was slightly more downwards directed, but you get the idea. And now, as you can see, it is bouncing every single time. Alright, now this line here looks a bit messy, so we could refactor it a bit. And when I say refactor, basically mean in a nutshell, we just want to make this look a bit nicer, right? So how we could do that? Well, alright, we could do rigid body 2D, and we can say bow rigid body, and we can also put component if we want to. So bow rigid body component. So what is the rigid body component going to be equal to? You can pause the video and try to initialize this variable to the correct piece of information that is contained within this line. So what we need to do is just say bow rigid body, and I keep having this camel case here. Well, the b should be lowercase. Rigid body components dot not dot but equal, and what we want it to be equal to is this. Well, actually not really. What we want it to be equal to is this. There we go. Now let's cut that, put it here. Then, alright, what's the next thing that we would want? Well, we could have the velocity vector to, we can just call it velocity, and then we would say, well, I mean, let's change the variable of that variable name, which would we could just call it vel. We just call it vel for now. And the reason I didn't want it to call it velocity is because it's already a keyword. So there might be a bit of conflict there. So we can just say, alright, we want to say vel. Well, before we go, actually, try to come up with what we need to initialize this vel to. Alright, I'm assuming you paused the video. Now here we go. We say vel equal to bow rigid component dot velocity. Alright, now this works here, but it looks again messy, so we're just going to put a semicolon there. And then what is the next thing we want to do? Well, we just want to change this velocity, right? That's all we are doing. So then we can just say vel is equal to this new vector. It just seems a bit better. But you might prefer the one-liner whichever really works for you. But this is a bit more readable, I guess. So yeah, in future videos we might play around with materials, like we could change the bounciness. Let's change it to 2 just really quick and see what's actually happening. So if I run that, you see that it is going to bounce really high. There we go. So the more it is, the higher it will jump. There we go. So we could play around with this. Also, we could play with the friction. So if we just put let's say put 4 and run, let's see what's going to happen. I think it's going to change much. Yeah, friction is basically what happens when it touches the collider, but we're not going to go into detail for that. I just wanted to introduce you to materials, and basically the main thing was how to make something bounce, because that's cool. Anyway, thank you guys for watching, and see you on the next video.